Hey there! In this segment, I'm going to share with you how I would use freezer paper piecing to piece the diamond foundations for the Murmuration Quilt pattern. Now, in an earlier segment, I shared with you how I would paper piece these foundations. Now, normally I do not like paper piecing whatsoever, but sometimes it's necessary. And for my Murmuration quilt, I use paper piecing. But recently it came to my attention that you could use freezer paper piecing if you want. So in this segment, I'm going to share with you how I would freezer paper piece these diamond foundations. So before I get started with the technique tutorial, I want to share with you what I've changed in my setup. So in terms of paper, I've got some foundations printed on printable freezer paper. I've checked to make sure that it's printed out at 100%, and I measured this 1-inch test square. So these are the foundations that I printed on printable freezer paper, and I've cut a foundation out. I'm going to be more reliant on my pressing station this go round. And as far as my sewing machine, I still have my walking foot on my sewing machine. It makes freezer paper piecing a little bit easier if you have access to a walking foot. But as far as stitch length, I'm going to go back to my normal piecing stitch length, which is about 2.2. So because we won't be sewing directly through the paper, there's no need to shorten your stitch length. So that's it in terms of changes in my setup. So on my workspace here, I've got a freezer paper foundation. So I'm going to walk you through how I would freezer paper piece this foundation. So I'm working with the same grouping of fabrics here. And so I'm going to pick my first strip of fabric for my foundation. Now it's going to go in the center, so I need it to be pretty long. And this is one of the side fabrics. So let me see if I've got a longer middle. So I had this nice big chunk here, but it's not long enough to go on my center here. So you can see plainly that it just doesn't cover the entire diamond foundation, right? So let me choose a different starting point. I could choose this bright blue. Yeah, this covers the entire length of the diamond here. So I'm going to start with this bright blue here. So earlier I used a pin to baste the fabric onto the foundation, but this go round I'm going to actually iron it so that the freezer paper activates and sticks to the fabric. So my next step over here is to press the fabric onto the freezer paper. And this strip's kind of skinny, so I'm going to go ahead and do it from this side. So what that does is it sticks the freezer paper to the fabric, and so now it's basted in place. Now, one of the keys in freezer paper piecing is folding the template back so you're not actually sewing through the foundation. So what I'm doing now is I'm folding the foundation back so that I can stitch about 1/4 of an inch away from that raw edge right there. So I've got this folded back a little bit. I think I could fold it back just a little bit more so that I have more of a 1/4 inch seam. So this is kind of a really narrow 1/4 inch seam, but I think it's going to work. So I've got the foundation, I've got the freezer paper folded back. And so my next step is to line up fabric 2. And you want to put the fabric right side up. So if you're using a print, you want to put the fabric right side up. I'm using a solid, so it doesn't matter. But if you're using a print, you want your fabric to be right side up. You want to press the wrong side of your fabric. The wrong side of the fabric needs to stick to the foundation. Okay, so I've got the foundation folded back, and now my next step is to line up the next piece of fabric. So I've chosen this bright green strip of fabric, and now I want to line up the foundation. I want to line up the raw edges. So I've got fabrics 1 and 2 lined up together, and the right sides are facing each other. The raw edges are lined up right here, and I'm making sure that fabric number 2 will cover the diamond here, this part of the diamond. So I want to make sure it's tall enough. So if I back this up a little bit so you can see. So I'm going to line up the foundation here, and you can see that the strip will be long enough to cover right here and right here. So now that you can see that, I'm going to line these raw edges up again, right sides together, and I've got it all set. So I'm going to go ahead and sew these. And when I sew these together, I'm going to sew right next to the fold. So in my sewing machine, I've got the unit all ready to go through my sewing machine. I'm going to sew right along the fold of the paper, but not through the paper. So really, the key for freezer paper piecing is just to sew right alongside the fold, but not through the paper. And I've sewn through the paper a little bit here, and that's okay. So I'm going to flip this over and get rid of my tail here, so I'm not dragging that along with me. Okay, and then I am going to unfold the paper and then press the seam. While I'm freezer paper piecing, I'm going to go ahead and press it with my iron. So here's my iron. I'm going to put the unit paper side down and just finger pressing first. Then I'll tell you what, I'm actually going to flip this over so I don't get the sticky part of the freezer paper on my iron. So I'm going to press it from the paper side. So now the freezer paper is sticking to all of the fabric. I'm going to lift up the fabric a little bit here so it's not sticking all the way. And now I'm going to fold this back again. It doesn't really matter where you fold it, but I'm just going to fold the paper out of the way. And then I'm going to get another piece of fabric. Let's do this skinny strip right here. And then I'm going to line up my fabrics right sides together. And I want to make sure I'm giving myself ample space. I don't want to be stingy on my height of my strip here. So I want to make sure I'm giving myself ample space right here. And once I'm convinced I have that, I'm going to line up the raw edges, right sides together, and then I'm going to stitch about 1/4 inch away from the raw edges right here. And you can see that I've got plenty of space right here. So normally in freezer paper piecing, you would sew right along the edge of the fold, but because this is improv, it doesn't matter exactly where we are stitching, but I want to make the most of my fabric, so I'm going to stitch about 1/4 inch away from the raw edges. So you can see that I've sewn about 1/4 inch away. It's by no means a perfect straight seam, but that's okay. This is improv. It's okay if it's not perfect. And just zooming in so you can see the stitches here. And the key is to not sew through the paper. All right, so I'm going to flip this over. I'm going to cut off my tail, trim my tail here so I'm not carrying it around with me. And then I'm going to press this, and I can use this rolling gadget again, or I can go and use my pressing, my actual iron. I'm not going to this go round. So I'm going to flip it over. I'm going to fold this back to at least 1/4 inch. I've got plenty of space. Then I'm going to line up my last bit of fabric over here. So I need to make sure I'm giving myself plenty of height. And then once I have plenty of height, I can line up these raw edges, right sides together, and then I can stitch. Okay, I've got this unit stitched, so I'm going to trim the tail and then unfold my paper and press this. And I'm going to press with my iron. So paper side down, and I'm going to press with my iron. All right, so my next steps are to finish this side of the diamond. So I'm going to repeat the process I've showed you. So let's see, I've got this fabric. This fabric is stuck. So I can loosen up this fabric because I want to fold the paper back. So I'm going to loosen up this fabric. I'm going to flip the unit over, and then I'm going to fold the paper back. I'm going to give myself a generous fold this time. So all I need is about 1/4 inch. Okay, so I'm going to line up my next piece of fabric. So it's long enough, so I'm going to line up the raw edges, right sides together, and then I'm going to stitch about 1/4 inch away from the raw edges. Okay, so I've sewn about 1/4 inch away, and my next step is to press. So I'm going to unfold the paper and then finger press. I'm going to go ahead and press with my iron. So paper side down. Okay, and you can press from the other side too. So I'm going to press from the freezer paper side, but I'm not going to press all the way to the edge of the blue fabric. I'm going to stop pretty short. And the reason is so I have all this loose paper to play with so I can fold it back. So I'm folding the paper back. And now I need to add at least one more strip over here. Okay, so I need to make sure my strip is long enough, and it looks like I've got plenty of room. And now I can line up the raw edges and then stitch. So I've got this unit stitched. So now I'm going to flip this over so I can press it. I've unfolded the paper. I'm going to finger press. And yes, I've covered the entire diamond. So now I can press the entire diamond with my iron. So I've got the paper side down and I'm just giving the entire unit a press. I can press from the freezer paper side to the paper side of the freezer paper. So this diamond is complete, and my next step would be to trim off the extra fabric. All right, so this diamond foundation has been freezer paper pieced. Now the next step is to take the paper foundation off the diamond, right? Now this is the cool thing about freezer paper piecing, because in freezer paper piecing, you don't need to tear the paper. All you need to do is to gently remove and peel off the freezer paper. So what I'm doing now is I'm gently peeling this back, and I'm noticing some fraying. So before ripping the entire foundation off, I'm going to stop and I'm going to remove the little threads that are fraying, and then I'm going to continue peeling. And actually, let me try the other side. I could even do it from one of the sides here. Okay, so I'm seeing that fraying again, so I'm just removing the threads. Okay, and voila, the freezer paper is off. I can reuse this freezer paper. Personally, I've been able to use a freezer paper foundation about 8 to 12 times, and I don't have any paper to tear. So this is how I would use the freezer paper piecing technique to piece the diamonds from the Murmuration pattern.